Well, good morning, everyone. Welcome to this wonderful panel, which is Strengthening the Protection of the Arctic, the Importance of Criminal Law. We have with us an amazing panel today, and we also have a couple of video, and I'm going to read a speech because unfortunately, due to the weather, we have actually, says she, I need to get my phone for the speech, excuse me 1 minute. So we're going to have a speech from the Minister of Belgium because unfortunately the weather has not allowed her to join us in person, which we're really sad about. Now, last month, some of you may have seen that in the UK, there was a tree that had stood for 300 years. It was a very famous tree called the Sycamore Gap, this beautiful lone tree. And for some unknown reason, a wanton act of criminality, somebody chopped down that tree. And it really hurt all of us. It was a very iconic, but a very visceral symbol of something that had stood and seen history and yet destroyed so suddenly. And the same, I mean, you know, there are, of course, much bigger environmental damages being done, things like, who can ever forget the Deepwater Horizon? And I was listening, we were in New York last month for the UNGA, and I was listening to Lewis Pugh, who's this wonderful swimmer who's swum all the oceans of the world. And he swam 315 miles down the Hudson River. And he was telling how in the early days, the Hudson River would change color. One day it would be yellow, one day it would be green, another day it would be blue. And why was that? Because there was a car paint factory just alongside the river, and they just tipped all their paint into the river. Fortunately, this time round, it's absolutely pristine waters, and he made 315-mile swim without any mishap. But what it does is show that we actually don't have much sanction for harms of nature. And for the sanctions that we do have seem to take an incredibly long time. So I think that this importance of recognition of ecocide and how we can use the criminal law to sanction these things is absolutely terrific and a wonderful concept. And I would like to, first of all, invite His Excellency George Manieri, who's the Ambassador of Vanuatu, to give a video, and then I will read out the speech, which I now have, after that. Thank you. Could we have that video, please?
Excellencies, ministers, colleagues, and friends, welcome to this important session. Greetings to you all from the people of Vanuatu. You may be wondering why a Pacific Ocean state is co-hosting a panel in a summit on climate on the Arctic. The reason, however, is not so very hard to understand. Vanuatu and the Arctic, on opposite sides of this planet, are profoundly connected by the common threat of climate vulnerability. Vanuatu is one of the world's most vulnerable countries with respect to climate and so-called natural disaster. In the spring of this year, Vanuatu was hit by 2 Category 4 cyclones in the space of a week. Our nation is consistently in disaster response mode. The foremost preoccupation and unavoidable constant for our government is now simply making sure our people have the basic survival needs met and a safe place to call home. This is not normal or natural. This is a disaster of human making due to man-made climate change, due to fossil fuel addictions, due to environmental distractions. Vanuatu's people are not responsible, but we suffer the worst consequences. This is already a reality in the Pacific and other poor and underdeveloped nations. And it is already the case in the Arctic. The ecosystem of the Arctic are already suffering deterioration at disproportionate speed, and you will be hearing from other speakers what the global impact is. Friends, while the international community does a lot of talking, there is not enough positive action and little accountability for government and industry to continue to damage our planetary systems. They do this not because they are deliberately setting out to destroy lives and livelihoods, but because the system they are competing in are simply not fit for purpose, especially in the context of climate and ecological crisis. We do not believe in blame, but we do believe in accountability. We believe in positive change, and we believe that international law is one of the most concrete and long-lasting ways to effect that accountability and that change. Vanuatu is therefore taking a legal approach to help those governments and those industries to move forward in a way that is safe for both people and the planet. There are two aspects to this approach. Firstly, we want to help government better understand their existing climate legal obligations, and so we launched, with the co-sponsorship of 132 nations, an advisory opinion procedure at the United Nations International Court of Justice. Our diplomatic and legal effort in this endeavor continue in epic proportion, engaging with developed and developing nations from all geographical regions. We demonstrate daily how to avoid the political and legal pitfalls which have plagued the UN climate negotiations for decades, and we are achieving what many experts and diplomatic pundits told us would be impossible. This is the first time an ICJ advisory opinion case has ever been passed by consensus in the UN General Assembly. We urge all countries to make submissions into this UN legal process. The deadline is in January 2024, so now is the time. Vanuatu is connecting government with the assistance needed, so please approach us. Secondly, we are working to adjust the legal parameters within which finance flows and industrial practices operate in order to prevent ongoing distractions and create safety and stability into the future. In this context, Vanuatu is proud to be leading the initiative to criminalize mass harm to nature known as Ecocide. In 2019, Vanuatu became the first sovereign state to call at the International Criminal Court's annual assembly for Ecocide to become a fifth crime under the Rome Statute. We have been working closely with the Stop Ecocide Foundation for some years in our effort towards this goal. And we are very excited to see how fast the discussion is now growing around the world. We trust that today's event will help to clarify how this approaching legal framework can help to stabilize both our ecological and our economic systems in order to provide safety for people and for the living world of which we are all part and upon which we all depend. We thank you all for coming today and wish you all fruitful discussions. Thank you.
That's wonderful. That's the ambassador to Brussels, and he actually has had many portfolios, so he's seen across the piece how climate is impacting everything from trade, climate, tourism, and as he said, their own survival. And I was very touched by him saying, you know, that it's this persistence, things that were thought to be impossible. And I was reminded of Nelson Mandela saying, you know, it's always impossible until it's done. So, and I think it's this persistence that is so important. But let me read, if I may, the speech from Minister Zakia Katabi, who is the Minister of Environment for the Kingdom of Belgium, and she's also Minister of Sustainability and the Green Deal. And I'm just really sad she's not here, a very dynamic woman who brings a particular feminine energy to the work she's doing. Ladies and gentlemen, it is a real pleasure to be with you here today to discuss the relevance of including ecocide in criminal legislation. As Federal Minister in charge of climate, the environment, sustainable development and Green Deal, I have considered different global challenges in a holistic way. We cannot consider human well-being and prosperity in isolation from the state of our natural ecosystems worldwide. As an ecologist, the struggle for justice in general and for the environment in particular are always part of my political conviction and specific initiatives. It is also part of my commitment to have ecocide included into criminal law. We live in a globalized world where states play a central role and an international legal system that still allows for immense injustices. One of the greatest injustices is the massive destruction of the environment on which humans depend. As the former Special Representative of the Secretary General for Human Rights and Transnational Corporations, Professor John Ruggie once said, "There is a mismatch between economic forces and governance capacity, and it is the most vulnerable people and the communities who pay the heaviest price," which of course is what we were hearing from Vanuatu. Given the magnitude of the challenge, we should address the situation with all the levers at our disposal, including through public debates, effective policies, and via the legal avenues. We can no longer tolerate entire communities over several generations living in an environment so polluted that their health and that of future generations is jeopardized. Indeed, at a time when 6 out of 9 planetary boundaries are already crossed, we can no longer tolerate the massive destruction of the environment. Recognition of the crime of ecocide is essential because these serious crimes cannot go unpunished. At the same time, recognizing the crime of ecocide in criminal law, at European or international level, can also play a role in preventing these crimes. We owe it to the people who are suffering from this destruction today. We must show that we recognize their suffering, and we owe it to future generations, as we must prevent further suffering and further victims. I have personally been active in different policy levels working to promote recognition of ecocide. Regarding the Belgian federal level, the government's coalition agreement stipulated that the advice of a panel of professors and other specialists in criminal law and environmental criminal law would be requested with a view to the inclusion of ecocide in the new criminal code. It is interesting to note that the Belgian legal experts' recommendation was very close to the independent experts panel proposed on the definition on ecocide, which Jojo will tell us more about. The criminal code was almost 150 years old and in urgent need of an update. I'm proud to say that we took the opportunity of developing a new criminal code to include ecocide as a new crime. The Council of Ministers agreed to do this last summer. The draft law of the new criminal code is since then submitted to the Parliament, the House of Representatives, and will be discussed in the Justice Committee in the coming weeks. It is our ambition to have the new penal code approved by both the government and the Parliament during the legislature, the elections in Belgium on the 9th of June in 2024. It is a milestone for Belgian criminal law. This makes Belgium the second Western European country after France to include ecocide in internal criminal law. My initial intention, was to include the crime of ecocide in the chapter of our criminal code devoted to crimes under international law. The proposed definition of the crime was the one proposed by the panel of independent experts convened in June 2021 at the initiative of the Stop Ecocide Foundation, based on the structure of Article 7 in the Rome Statutes. However, the text adopted by the federal government is a compromise. The scope is not as large as I would have wanted it to be, but it's a first step with significant symbolic value. While not perfect, I believe we should celebrate this result. We've got our foot in the door, and it is an invitation to other authorities in other countries to also include ecocide in their criminal law. At the international level, together with Vanuatu, I have worked to establish a group of friends of ministers in charge of the environment from countries of different regional groups in order to advocate for an in-depth discussion on the inclusion of ecocide in the Rome Statute. It should not only be considered in the context of an armed conflict. As discussions often stumble over a definition or over geopolitical or legal considerations, It is my belief that ministers in charge of the environment and sustainable development should continue to build the momentum and remind fellow ministers and other stakeholders why this is so important. Ladies and gentlemen, I wish you an insightful and inspiring discussion. Thank you. And to tell us a little more, actually, about this definition and the process and the vision, I'd like to introduce the dynamic Jo Mehta, who co-founded in 2017 Stop Ecocide with the late Polly Higgins. And she's the executive director, and with this remarkable energy has really overseen growth of the organization, tremendous diplomatic traction, and also public awareness raising. As a strategist, things do tend to follow trends, don't they? And it feels as if this is the right time. I'm sure it's felt like pushing water uphill with a rake for a long time, Jojo, but things come together in the right time. So I would like to hand over to Jojo, and she can tell us more in detail of what promoted that. Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, colleagues and friends. It's an honour to be present here in this hall at the Arctic Circle Assembly on its 10th anniversary. I'll give a brief overview of the growing momentum behind the legal initiative to criminalise mass harm to nature, or as it is now increasingly known, ecocide. There is, of course, already a large body of environmental laws around the world, as well as an increasing number of multilateral environmental agreements. In the present context, the recent High Seas Treaty, or BBNJ, already signed by over 80 states, is a case in point. And yet, that body of laws has thus far proved inadequate. We stand, as a civilization, not at the brink, but already in the throes of ecological collapse, with, as Inga mentioned, more than half of the key planetary boundaries for safe human habitation already crossed. Why is this? Quite simply, the culturally dominant global mindset, that arising from the West, does not take protection of the living world seriously enough, and we underestimate the significance of destroying it. We see environmental damage as an expected, regrettable side effect of the extraction and disposal of the materials and the stuff we have come to believe we need. But without clean water, without breathable air, without fertile soil, and as those working to protect the Arctic know only too well, without ice, we shall quickly come to realise what our needs truly are. The understanding of nature purely as a bank of resources has been leading for many decades to the destruction of the ecosystems that sustain us all. The health and livelihoods of humans and the survival of millions of fellow species are severely affected. Particularly in the case of the Arctic, as we shall hear in more detail from other speakers, these effects reach well beyond the geographical area in question. The embedded cultural resistance to perceiving the significance of this damage means that our current system is failing to effectively address it, and this must change. Ultimately, billions of lives depend upon it. Criminal law has a hugely significant role to play here. Unlike regulatory law, where most environmental law sits, it has a moral aspect that is hugely powerful. Murder is not only a crime to punish murderers, it is a crime to stop us killing each other. Criminal law is what reflects our sense of what is unacceptable and dangerous. It is what keeps us safe. The criminalisation of ecocide, recognition of the worst harms to nature as serious international level crimes, will go a long way to shifting these cultural attitudes, improving judicial enforceability of relevant laws, and providing a strong deterrent to destructive behaviours. One need only imagine how differently a board of directors will approach its environmental obligations, knowing that if it fails to fulfil them and threatens ecocide as a result, it will not simply be fined. Its members could be in criminal law territory, and its company reputation, and indeed stock value, could be severely affected. For ecocide to be recognised as an international crime, an amendment to the Rome Statute of the International Criminal Court must be agreed and adopted by at least 2/3 of states parties to that statute. At the current pace of developments at national and regional level, we believe this could and should happen before 2030. The most important milestone in this rapidly evolving conversation was the emergence of the aforementioned definition of ecocide as an international crime, proposed by an independent expert panel of top lawyers from around the world, convened in 2020 by our charitable foundation. Can I have the slide for the definition, please? Thanks. According to the expert panel's consensus proposal, ecocide means unlawful or wanton acts committed with knowledge that there is a substantial likelihood of severe and either widespread or long-term damage to the environment being caused by those acts. And this definition has become the de facto starting point for legal and political discussions of ecocide law across the globe. By focusing not on particular acts, but on the severity of threatened consequences, it avoids a number of political and practical pitfalls. It establishes broad applicability, and it also creates foundational support for existing regulation and criminal provision. As you can see, there's a threshold there, unlawful or wanton acts. Effectively, what we discovered in the course of our work is that many of the worst damages to the environment are already in breach of rights frameworks or regulatory frameworks. This definition is also dynamic over time. As laws in particular sectors are improved, so does this definition improve. Indeed, we believe it firmly represents an essential parameter for the healthy functioning of human societies into the future, and we urge all legislators to pay close attention to it. Dozens of nations, indeed, are now talking about this law, with Belgium, as we just heard, in the process of legislating, and domestic bills proposed or announced in Brazil, the Netherlands, Scotland, Spain, Catalonia, Mexico, and Italy in just the last few months. Our co-host today, the Republic of Vanuatu, particularly vulnerable to the effects of anthropogenic climate change, and Ukraine, victim of severe environmental destruction in armed conflict, are vocal advocates. An international crime of ecocide is also supported by the European Parliament, 27 states, the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe, 46 states, the Parliamentary Assembly of the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, 57 states, the Interparliamentary Union, 179 states, the International Corporate Governance Network, a grouping of the world's top asset managers, the World Council of Churches, the Alliance of Mother Nature's Guardians, a network of indigenous leaders from around the world. Youth, faith, and ocean networks have endorsed the initiative, as have citizens' assemblies and business and investment networks. Stop Ecocide International continues, of course, to encourage diplomatic engagement and develop civil society support networks at all levels. Ladies and gentlemen, we are seeing a clear legislative direction of travel emerging, and as you will hear from other speakers today, this could not be more relevant or timely for the Arctic. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jojo. Well, as you put it, it's pretty much a no-brainer, isn't it, really? Now, to take a new perspective on this, I'm going to invite Kristin Vala Ragnarsdottir to speak. I know, Vala, you don't necessarily want to come up to the podium, but Vala is Professor of Sustainability Sciences at the University of Iceland, and she's a Distinguished Fellow of the Schumacher College in the UK. She's also a member of the Club of Rome and of the Balloton Group and of numerous scientific academies. She's a founding member of the Wellbeing Economy Alliance, which is a really interesting organization, and is the co-author of 2 reports on ecocide law and planetary boundaries, and also on ecocide law and how it relates to the Paris Agreement. So a really deep and broad view of how ecocide can be applied. So Vala, I'm going to ask you, what role can ecocide law play in limiting global warming?
Thank you. I'm going to sit here so that I can look you in the eye and tell you that it's now 23 years since I woke up to the unsustainability in the world we live in. And every year I've been hoping that we will make some advances to halt the destruction of our planet. But no, we continue as before. We have soft agreements, such as the Paris Agreement, but emissions are still rising 8 years on. We have the Sustainable Development Goals, which gave us hope, but we are not advancing on them as we should now, when we have gone halfway. So soft agreements are not working. And there are two reasons for that I have pinpointed. One is that it is legal to destroy nature. It's illegal to destroy the life-supporting system of our planet. So we are in a crisis of governance. And the only thing that we can do is to make ecocide a crime, and that will shift our thinking. And when I met Polly Higgins now 10 years ago, I realized that this was the biggest one step we could do and take together as a global community to protect our living systems. Because if we destroy life on land and in the oceans, we go along with it. The planet will be fine, probably happy that we are gone, but we will not, and our children will not. And the reason why I've been working on this for now more than 20 years is that I do not want my grandchildren to say, "Granny, you're an environmental scientist, why didn't you do anything?" So that's why I'm sitting here and telling you we have to get together the governments of the world to adopt ecocide into the Rome Statute. And as has already been, we have already been told, this is a relatively easy process to take. So go and talk to your governments, talk to your parliamentarians, get it on the agenda. But this is not the only thing that we have to do. We also have to change our economic system, because our economic systems, as we have developed them and relied on neoclassical market economy, and then from the 19th century, and then added to that policies of neoliberalism, this is what's driving us to destruction. So we also need to think about what the economy is for. Repurpose the economy for the well-being of people and planet. And that's what the Well-Being Economy Alliance is working on. So if we put ecocide law into the Rome Statute and we slow down the momentum of destruction, we can put a safety rail around our living systems and find ways to reach the Paris Agreement, find ways to shift the economy from destructive practices to regenerative practices for people and planet. So ecocide law is the safety rail we need to shift the investments, to make it illegal to go from destroying the planet. And this is like a no-brainer, ladies and gentlemen. I invite you to the party, and it would be nice to sit here in a couple of years' time, and the Rome Statute nations have already united to to make ecocide a crime. Thank you.
Thank you, Vala. Absolutely. Wouldn't it be nice to do that? Just be sitting here and accomplish these things. And we have to accomplish them fast. And I was touched by your saying about your grandchild, because the organization I co-founded called Global Choices, we allow everyone to choose. We still use business cards, and we allow everyone to choose what they say on the back of the business card. And on the back of my card, it says, what will you say if a child asks you what you did to protect the environment? And I think you're absolutely right. And we have to think generations, and I'm sure Uncle will have some ideas on.
Can I add one thing?
Yeah.
We have a call to scientists to support ecocide law. So if you go to the Stop Ecocide Earth/scientists, you're invited to sign. And if you're not a scientist, you find other groups you can sign.
Well, we have with us a lovely scientist, Susanna Hancock, who not only is a scientist herself, but was president of the Association for the Polar Early Career Scientists, encouraging young scientists into polar science. She is the science manager of the Arctic Base Camp, and Arctic Base Camp is another organization we're in huge admiration of, that takes science and makes it communicable and popular and understandable for ordinary people. Her research also involves skiing across the polar ice caps, which is it sounds to me fairly daunting. So we look forward to hearing your intervention. I mean, also how science, what is science telling us about the impacts?
Thank you. So, yes, thank you very much, and thank you to the Republic of Vanuatu Stop Ecocide Foundation, Stöðvum vistmorð. As said, I'm Susanna, and really interested in the role that science contributes to the discussion on ecocide. So the Arctic really can determine the fate of humanity. It's the fastest warming spot on the planet, and it's a barometer for global change. We've spoken a little bit about the planetary boundaries, but we also have the climate tipping points. 9 of the 16 globally accepted climate tipping points are in the Arctic. 5 of the 6 that are expected to be passed within the threshold of the Paris Agreement are also within the Arctic. These tipping points show that with this tipping points and science, that 1.5 degrees, 2 degrees is not some arbitrary number. It's not a policy target. It's not a goal. It is a physical limit. We know much about the vulnerability of the Arctic is due to living out of harmony with the world around us. It's due to our continued reliance on fossil fuels, resources. This reliance of our generalized global energy system that is continuing with global subsidies topping more than $7 trillion US dollars last year, more than double what it was in 2020 alone. In determining carbon budgets globally, we don't even factor in thawing permafrost, which itself could contribute 25 to 40% of eating up our carbon budget to stay under 2 degrees centigrade. Similarly, the loss of Arctic snow and ice could exacerbate global warming up to 40%. This is how critical this region of the world is, and we are rapidly losing its white reflective cover. Globally, as our friends in places like Vanuatu know, warming Arctic drives extreme weather. It drives vector-borne diseases, heat stress. It drives water and food insecurity, raising the risk that we could have simultaneous failures in all 6 breadbasket regions of the world together. Our continued use of fossil fuels have destabilized the Greenlandic ice sheet so much that we have committed ourselves to a minimum of 27 centimeters of global sea level rise. even if all emissions were to have already stopped. Unfortunately, most of this sea level rise will be felt in regions that are already being decimated by rising tides. Knowing this is locked in, of course, means that our adaptation plans, especially in vulnerable regions, need to build up from this point. Similarly, do you know that places like Africa, Southeast Asia, are expected to be the most affected by advances in Arctic shipping? Transiting through the Arctic might save time, it might save money, but it's only in very rare occasions is it going to save emissions. I believe that number is 1 out of 25,000 ships might see a small, sort of a 24% reduction in emissions. So what happens in the Arctic certainly doesn't stay here. The Arctic isn't just a location, it's a homeland, it's a delicate ecosystem. How we treat the rest of our planet affects the Arctic, and the rapid changes in within this northern barometer quickly spread, affecting the rest of the world. The Arctic, the polar regions, the global cryosphere contains our future drinking water. It contains the future of our agriculture. It holds the future of our farming. It's not disconnected, but it's entirely connected with our future planet. So what do we do? Whilst the region contains about 13% of our untapped oil, 30% of our natural gas, we know, as per a recent report by the International Energy Agency, that these must stay in the ground if we are to achieve net zero by 2050. Drilling for oil in the Arctic neither increases energy security, nor does it reduce costs to consumers. But we need to frame the Arctic within all global discussions. It's directly relevant to each one of the 17 global sustainable development goals. That is, with a warming Arctic, each SDG is literally on thin ice. The Climate Vulnerable Forum estimates that health impacts due to climate change could reach $2 to $4 billion by the end of this decade. If we want to eradicate malaria, dengue, Zika, we need the Arctic. If we want stable nutrition, we need the Arctic. If we want to eradicate civil conflict over resources, again, we need the Arctic. If we want to educate girls, we need the Arctic. If we want to prevent catastrophic flooding that we've been seeing simultaneously around the world from Hong Kong to Libya, we need the Arctic. Too many of our global discussions about the Arctic are powered by greed and a disconnect between the global resources and the way that too many of us are living our lives. But we cannot let these get in the way of indigenous knowledge, of science, of our existence, and of the planetary boundaries. To not listen to this special region is a catastrophic policy failure. So, thank you.
Thank you, Susanna, for that global view. And it's interesting, isn't it, that how much is connected to the Arctic. And for so long, people have not even thought about the Arctic as being relevant. It's up there somewhere, and the scientists and explorers care about it. But thank you for that overview. Now, to bring it home, I'd like to introduce Shreya KC, who is a wonderful youth activist and climate justice advocate from Nepal. And as Susanna mentioned, this is a cryosphere that we're talking about, that we're watching go extinct on our watch. And that part of that cryosphere, of course, is what is commonly called the third pole. And you live in the lap of the Himalayas, and you have seen the impacts of this at the front lines for yourself and the community. But just a little bit about Shreya. She's always so modest, but has enormous accomplishments under her belt as a young activist, has worked globally with other young activists. She's a member of Youngo. She's also the advisor to the Nepalese Youth Climate Action Group. And we're very proud that she's one of our Arctic Angels, which is a network of 67 now, young women climate leaders in 37 countries. And each of them bringing something incredibly not just knowledge, but a degree of wisdom, which I think is remarkable. So, Shreya, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Hi everyone, Namaste. My name is Shreya Kesi and I am from Nepal. It's an absolute pleasure to share this floor with not just one, not just two, but 7 amazing individuals with the remarks of 2 excellencies who are putting diverse perspective on this table. It took me 40 hours to arrive in Iceland from Nepal, so I feel like I'm in a different part of the world. Yeah, so I mean, it was in class 5 or class 4, I think, when I read that all of the living beings have the equal right to live in nature, and human beings are just a part of it. So if that is right, then all of the intentional activities that is being done by top corporates, top governments, that is like intentionally destroying the entire ecosystem, that should be an ecocide. It is as simple as it is, right? And so to talk more about third pole, so my hometown is in Solukhumbu. You might not have heard about Solukhumbu, but you might have heard about Mount Everest, which is the highest mountain in the world. And Nepal has 8 of the world's 14 mountains. So, and mountains are not just like mountain for us. It's a source of water, and it's also shapes us who we are as an individual. It shapes of our traditional values, how we live as a society, how we think, how we grow, all of those things. And because of the warming nowadays, in the past few decades, the melting of the glaciers has been so extreme. And because of that, the glacial lakes has been formed beyond the glaciers. And I mean, the glacial lake outburst flood is not that frequent, but it happens. And when it happens, it destroys, it sweeps away entire villages in a matter of few seconds. And it does not just only destroys the developmental infrastructures that we built very hardly. Even to build one school, to build one hospital, it takes years and like lots of money as well. So it does not just destroy that developmental infrastructures, but it takes away that hope from the people to live, to grow. And because of those cases, there are frequent cases of migration. And I mean, it's not just an environmental problem, but so what happens is Nepal is a patriarchal society, and much of our economy depends on agriculture. So when the monsoon pattern is like changed because of the changing the rainfall patterns, and because of the invasive species and because of warming, the agricultural productivity is very less, and that has pushed families to poverty. And because men are the traditional providers for the family, when it is not like sufficient, then most of them, they go to alcohol to cope, and that is also somehow increasing the sexual violence. And if we see many of the male, especially from the villages, they are going to the Gulf countries, Malaysia, Qatar, Dubai, to work, to earn. And so they are forced to go out of the country to earn. And if we see, because of the rising temperatures, especially in the Gulf countries, the extreme heat is so much, and because of that, we receive many dead coffins every year, and which is like another impact on how it is indirectly impacting us. So this is just an example of how we in Nepal are being impacted by climate crisis. So if you talk about Nepal, the emission is like 0.03%. We are like least developed country, we're still yet to be developed, and we are planning to graduate to middle income developing country by 2026 along with Bangladesh. But it lies as like one of top 4 vulnerable countries in terms of climate crisis. So yeah, this is just an example of how we live in, who lives in another part of the world, and much of our population do not know about climate crisis. So we might have been facing the impact of climate change, but like many of the people who especially live in the higher altitude, they believe that it is not, it is because the God is angry, the nature God is angry, and we have to do something to make them happy. So that is part of the belief that we have. And so just in March, the Willow project was approved by US President Joe Biden, and I think that is just one clear trend of how things are changing, and still like we are in climate crisis. As Professor Vala also mentioned, we are in like the crisis of governance. We are in climate crisis, we are in ice crisis, but still rather than taking action with ambition, with urgency, with collaboration, like those people who have the privilege, who has the wealth, who has the power to do something, they are still destroying this planet. And because of that, those impacts are being faced, those burdens are being taken away by the people who do not know about climate change, who have negligible contribution to it. And like if we talk about this Willow project, it is said that it will it will be the largest oil reserve in the US, and that will emit around 9.1 million tons of CO2 every year, and it will cause irreparable damage in the Arctic, in the wildlife, in the ecosystem, and also in the people who is dependent on it. So if we see, US talks about, okay, the Paris Agreement is back in the White House, this and that, but if we see the actions, right, that's not really meeting up with what they speak. And I think it is relatable with most of the countries that has higher emissions still now. And so Arctic and South Pole, it is quite interconnected, and because this is my first time attending the Arctic Circle Assembly, I'm quite finding that this kinds of like collaboration, this kinds of gathering, this kinds of sharing should also happen in the South Pole. And South Pole is called South Pole because it has the largest ice glacier after North Pole and the South Pole, and it is also known as Hindu Kush Himalaya. And so it provides ecosystem services directly, and that benefits 240 million people. And if we see, it provides like the water to the major river systems, for example, Yellow River, Ganges, Indus, Brahmaputra, and so on, and on which 2 billion people rely. And the warming is almost twice faster in that region. And because it's like in the top of the world, we say it's the pulse of the planet, because we feel the impact at the very first before it is felt by anywhere. And Arctic is also being melted. I mean, it's like around 4 times faster than the global average. And if we see, around 71% of the Arctic ice has been melted away since 1971, 79. And like, it's not just about the melting. So when it melts, it sets off like a series of cascading impact. So when the ice sheet that has the higher albedo that reflects the sunlight back to the atmosphere, and when, because of that, when the darker lands are exposed, those observe the radiation higher, and that is also increasing warming. And we can also hear about the thawing of the permafrost, which releases methane, which is like higher global warming potential than carbon dioxide. So it's just setting off one after another event. And as I said before, so we are in a crisis phase, but still top governments, top corporates, they choose to destroy this. And at the root of this, there is ecocide, right? And we have been doing action. So I started my climate activism when I was 17 years old, and now I'm 24, 25. So sometimes I'm quite worried that if in my late 30s, if I will worry that I spent most of my youth period talking about climate change and doing activism. And right now I feel this is a very right thing to do, but in the future, right, I think this is climate crisis and all of these things happening, the ecocide, it should not be the burden of us, and it is also an intergenerational injustice. This is like another part of the coin. So we need ecocide law because we need something beyond words, that is action, that holds countries accountable, that makes them say, okay, hey, do not mess with this place. There are consequences, right? I think that message needs to be so far and clear. And especially in the international system where the laws is like in the highest order, when we have this ecocide, I think this is the answer that we need right now. And there are soft agreements being made, this and that. There are so many speeches, so many talks, so many policies are being made, but we are not really going to that space. So when we have this ecocide law that will protect the entire natural ecosystem, that would be a good thing. And from the global choices, we are now calling for immediate 10-year moratorium on all of the activities that harms the fragile ecosystem in the central Arctic ice shield. And so with that, along with that, we also mean that it should not like continue the activities as like radioactive waste dumping, fossil fuel extraction, this and that in the Arctic region. And along with that, we are also calling for innovative legal governance mechanism. And I think this is being put by the ecocide law. And when we have this ecocide law, as I said before, like we can hold those who are responsible and bring justice to those who have done nothing, but who are taking up the burdens of their impact. So to preserve the present and the future that we have, and to preserve the entire living system in the earth, we need an ecocide law. And all of us, we need to work together from South Pole to Arctic, from South Pole to North Pole. Thank you. I'll stop here.
Well, thank you, Shreya. I think we've seen that everything is interdependent and interconnected and also intergenerational, because this is a fight for all of us, really. And it is also, Jojo, you mentioned moral. I think, in part, it's because of this notion of separation from the earth that nurtures us, separation from one another, but also separation perhaps from ourselves. And this is where I would love to invite Uncle Angankwak, if I've got that. No, I haven't got that right, but at least I tried, who is an indigenous elder and a representative of Greenland, living in the far north of Greenland, and a shaman who can bring really a sense of this wisdom and a sense of the moral and imperative to do this work. And also, of course, the indigenous wisdom, which is so crucial that we recover, which is always about interconnectedness, interdependence, Mother Earth, and not being separate, understanding the oneness of everything. So we first met at the Vatican, where you were playing your wonderful wind drums, and maybe I could invite you to tell us a little more. Thank you.
Ho ho! Ho ho! Ho ho! Ho ho! Our beloved grandmother, her name is Anagasa, told us that life is a ceremony in itself, worthy celebrating with a ceremony. So I said a little prayer, remembering how important it is to honor every one of you. You traveled a long ways, but you want to understand strengthening protection of the Arctic. I am from the Arctic. I'm the only living one who has visited every single Eskimo village of Greenland, Canada, and Alaska. So I traveled a bit. And it's so interesting to realize how important it is to protect Mother Earth. Yes, it's a beautiful word to speak about. But as the old people say, it's action which comes after the law, which will make a difference. I spoke to the United Nations in 1977. And I said to the United Nations in Vancouver that the government of Canada is as effective as a kayak without a paddle when it comes to the native people. And soon thereafter, Prime Minister Pierre Trudeau showed up. And a person was speaking from India, So the moderator stopped him and told Prime Minister of Canada, you know, we just had a visitor from the Arctic, an Eskimo, who told us that the government of Canada is as effective as a kayak without a paddle. What do you think? And the poor man, who had not been prepared, started to fiddle around with his words and talked about canoe, because he's a canoeist. I'm a kayak man, very different boat. So I tried to stop him, to make him aware that I'm talking about kayak, not a canoe. But he kept talking. So I said, Prime Minister, didn't help. Prime Minister Pierre Trudeau didn't help. Pierre, he stopped. And I said to him, you know, it is true that everything is important. It's not enough to know that it is important. It's what you do what is important. Yes, we want to protect my land. My land is the biggest land on earth. My tribe, as you call them, Eskimo, we are the largest landholders of any tribe on earth. 13 time zones from east to west. An Iceland there would take more than 9 hours to fly from the top of Canada or from Greenland down to the island in Newfoundland. More than 9 hours. That's the land I come from. It's enormous. Bigger than Reykjavik. Maybe even Iceland. It's really big. Worth protecting. Why? That's the one which is causing need for protection of the Arctic, because the ice is melting. The ice is melting so bad, that my river on my land, which is my grandmother's land, sometimes run more than 1 million liters per second just from the melting ice. I don't know, has anyone ever been to Canada? Have you heard about something called Niagara Falls? It's a beautiful, beautiful falls. Sea air is only 750,000 liters per second. My river on my land, where my family had lived for thousands of years, runs more than 1 million liters per second from the melting ice. Guess how it started melting? A wild guess. Because of you. We, after all, just 60,000 people at home. Because 30,000 of us lives in Denmark as escapees from the land. So 60,000 people, we don't have much impact. 8 billion people, they have a lot of impact. So, because of you, the ice is melting. I'm going to be celebrating my 47th birthday. Yes, I'm going to be 47 on November 2nd. I hope somebody will give me a birthday gift. Nice cup of coffee. No. It's so bad because of you. Because you forgot to take care of the land you live on. And your land has enormous impact for the rest of the earth. Not one single country like Nepal, or Iceland, or Greenland, or England is on its own. We all hang together. That's why we call this earth Mother Earth. It really is our mother. If it is our mother, she is worth protecting. I protected my mother. I protected my grandmothers. I protected my sisters, my aunties. Not because I'm strong, but because I was instructed by the elders that you had to protect mothers. We don't do that anymore. And we don't protect the Arctic. No, not only the Arctic. We don't protect Mother Earth. We talked a lot about her. A lot. So, what should we do? Let's imagine that from talking, that we will take action. That's a nice concept, isn't it? Let's go beyond talking. Let's go to that point where we can truly protect not just the Arctic, but Mother Earth. She is, after all, worth protecting because the way you live. I want to make a difference somehow. I don't know exactly how. But the old people say that I have to be firmly grounded on Mother Earth. And I wonder, will I ever become that firmly grounded on Mother Earth? Or should I wait till I become old? I am old now. In a few days I will be 76 years old. I traveled the world. I met millions of people, incredibly beautiful people. But we listen, but forget to act. So my prayer to you is that somehow you and I begin to act, to protect not just the Arctic, but Mother Earth. Oh.
To act. And I think everybody on this platform has acted, and few have to act in a more difficult place than in the political arena. And so I'd like to welcome Anders Johnson, who has for 6 years been with the Pirate Party and has been fighting for green issues in the Icelandic Parliament. And in 2022, I think it was, you put a proposition to a resolution to the parliamentary, to the Icelandic Parliament to add Ecocide to the ICC. And you have, if anyone has, experience of the challenges that you face in doing that, but also the pressures as an activist. I think, I don't know who it was Cornel West, I think, who said, never forget that justice is what love looks like in public. And I think you've been fighting to do that, so maybe you could tell us a little more. Thanks, Anders.
Thank you. It's a bit of a challenge following this great lineup of speakers, but I'll try to make sense. As you say, I have sort of hands-on experience with using ecocide as a term in the political arena. Iceland's one of the countries that's taken the concept for a test run, both by politicians and the public. And it's actually been an all right experience. I was a bit nervous at first, but then things worked out quite well. The whole thing started when a few of us went to the climate conference, the COP26 in Glasgow 2 years ago. And there are many ways to summarize what was said at that climate conference, but I think we can maybe take it down to one sentence, which is, do something, guys. That was well, it's basically what they say every time, but they said it really loudly in Glasgow. So a few months later, we put forward the resolution to the Icelandic Parliament we went across the political spectrum, so we had members of 4 different parties out of the 8 in Parliament support this. So already we had wide support. In the end, Parliament didn't have the courage to take the step that year, but rather referred it to the government to do something with it. Sometimes people think this is a way to make things go away, make the issue quiet, make it disappear. Maybe that was the plan. No, I don't think that was a plan, because everyone was positive, interested in the discussion. But it has definitely not been the case for the government, because since this happened, ecocide has been popping up in the international arena everywhere. It's one of the 10 points in the Ukrainian peace plan. It was discussed in this hall when Iceland hosted the Council of Europe Leadership Summit at the beginning of this year. They just haven't gotten away from the concept of ecocide. So I think slowly but surely we're working our way into the core of politics. But it didn't need a huge amount of persuasion for the Prime Minister to be positive. The Icelandic Prime Minister, members of her party supported the proposal, and she's really interested in getting this intersection of human rights and environmental justice dealt with in a proper fashion in the international arena, and ecocide being one of those tools that she can use for that. But the reason I was nervous when we brought this proposal forward is that from all my experience as a politician, and as a politician that talks a lot about climate and the environment, I've realized that speaking the language of normal human beings is sometimes a challenge in politics, especially when you're talking about climate issues. I was standing in the podium in Parliament a few days ago, and when just as soon as the phrase kilotons of CO2 equivalent came out of my mouth, I was just like, oof, this guy again. And you just lose the room like this. I'm not saying we should dumb everything down, but we need to phrase things in a way that people understand. So, and this is a challenge because legal language is not human language. And the language of international law is definitely not human language. So when you bring a new concept from international law into the local context, I think it's right to be nervous, but I was very surprised at the reception we got, because people just got it like this, just instantly understood what the concept was about. And that's the beauty of ecocide. We know what it means before we hear the word for the first time. All of us have some sort of experience, a collective experience of environmental injustice. So whenever we were speaking to members of the public or politicians or whomever in Iceland, there were like 2 or 3 issues that they were like, oh, is it like Kárahnjúkar? Or, oh, is it like when the US Army base polluted the well in Keflavik? Oh, is it like this or that? Everyone has this in their collective memory, so all we had to do was to say, yeah, it's similar to that, but on a bigger scale. And that was amazing. I mean, suddenly we had a new concept, we had a new tool that people understood. And since then, it's not just the Council of Europe or Ukraine or whatever that are using this term, but we're seeing it's seeped into public discourse. We're seeing it in articles by just some people on the street. And this really goes to show we're part of these ecosystems as well. I mean, we understand that when we're hurting Mother Earth, we're also hurting ourselves. So I'm still a bit hopeful that the government will carry the torch on and will use its power within institutions like the Nordic Council. It's a region that wants to portray itself as the most sustainable region in the world. Why not do that by leading by example and criminalizing ecocide? But that's also a challenge, because going back to the opening statement from the ambassador of Vanuatu, we're missing actions and we're missing accountability in the global system and in the political system in every country. The example Shreya mentioned of Biden opening up new oil exploration licenses in the US, at the same time he's claiming to be ambitious on climate issues. This is an example we can take in so many countries. If we just look around the Arctic, so we had the International Energy Authority give out a report a couple of weeks ago that didn't say do something, but it said stop doing this, and they said stop doing more oil drilling, just period. We can't drill for more oil. At the same time, the report showed that the 4 countries with the biggest ambition for new oil and gas projects are also portraying themselves as global climate leaders in the north. So it's the USA, it's the UK, it's Norway, and Canada. These 4 account for almost half of the foreseen oil exploration in the future, exploration that cannot happen if we don't want to kill Mother Earth. And speaking of Norway, our ambitious neighbor in the east, I mean, they're planning deep sea mining between Iceland and Norway. So actions and accountability are the big problem these days. And anything that can help us frame a system that makes it impossible for politicians to claim that they're ambitious on environmental and climate issues, but still do things that are detrimental to those issues. A tool that can make big global corporations accountable so they can't greenwash themselves. That's something we really, really need. And I'm hoping that, like Vala said, we'll be here in a couple of years' time celebrating the success we've had.
Well, thank you very much, Anders. Of course, the thing to remember is that we are also all empowered. We are voters. We are consumers. We are communicators. And we can and do make change in that way. So I'm sure that you have many burning questions. I know we've had a lot of interest. This is not being live streamed, but online we've had a lot of questions already. So I'm going to invite anyone from the audience if you would like to ask any questions of this very wonderful and very diverse panel with all these different perspectives on ecocide. I think we have a microphone somewhere. Do you have a...
Yeah, it's there.
Okay. Yeah, okay.
Good morning. Oh, there. Okay.
They are there.
There. Oh, okay, I see. Sorry, I thought you were behind.
High up.
Yeah. So it's black from here, and the lights. I can't
Pull it
see.
down.
Yeah.
It's so hard.
Okay.
Okay.
Det hjälper en att lacka.
Yeah. All right. Good morning. Practical questions. Can states have reservations for ecocide in the ICC? And what has to happen now? Do states need to vote for specifically to get it in the ICC? Does there need to be a conference? Do states need to vote, and then when they all vote and then have enough of the 2/3, then it becomes law? Thank you.
Yeah, so the procedure for making ecocide part of the Rome Statute, which is the governing document of the International Criminal Court, it's enough for a single state to make the proposal, but of course one also needs a momentum, and we're encouraging that to be a group of states that move forward with that. The first stage would be to bring it into either the working group on amendments, which the Assembly of States Parties at the ICC has, or potentially even create a special working group dedicated to a fifth crime of ecocide. This is how it was done for the addition of the crime of aggression. So this is a procedure that has been done before successfully. Yes, in answer to your question, can anybody, can states sort of have a reservation or a veto? No, they can't. And actually, that's one of the advantages of going for this particular route of the ICC, because like the UN, it is a one state, one vote forum, which means that, of course, a lot of these climate vulnerable small island states can actually come together and make a significant difference to that vote. But unlike the UN, there is no Security Council and there is no veto. So it really is quite simply a numbers game. And we're already kind of encouraging and facilitating the moving forward of this conversation at the diplomatic level. We work very much at two levels, so a lot of closed door convening around the sort of state representatives, and then of course, as we have here, a broader discussion amongst civil society and sort of cross-feeding that conversation. And the reason I mention that is that, as I'm sure we all know, no politician likes to be the first person at a party, apart from a few very brave ones. So the more that the discussion is live and permeating civil society and coming up in many different areas, the faster that conversation moves at the political level. Ultimately, in order for adoption to happen, one needs 2/3 of those states to be on board. What I will say is that although normally the changing international law is a long and laborious process, when we look at what's happened with the initiative around ecocide, we've moved from a zero conversation 5 years ago when no governments were talking about it, to a situation now where at least 35 countries have public record discussion of criminalizing ecocide at parliamentary or government level, and many countries already having proposals proceeding through their parliaments, which is obviously in turn supporting the direction at the ICC at the international level. And we attended just last week a celebratory kind of conference in the south of Italy around 25 years since the Rome Statute was signed, and there were several sessions where ecocide was discussed. So this is, it's a very, very kind of live and fast-moving conversation, no doubt helped by the fact that more and more of us can see how urgent this is when we look out at what's happening in the world.
Thank you, Jojo, and you and your team are to be congratulated for making this happen in this time. And as I said in the beginning, it does feel that there is a rising of different things, which is giving you a wind under those wings, right? Which is fantastic. Has anyone got any more questions? Would anybody else like to ask a question? Do, please.
Good morning, panel. My name is Monica Lennon. I'm a parliamentarian from Scotland in the UK, so here from the Scottish Parliament, and I heard that call to action 2 years ago in Glasgow at COP26. So I'm pleased to say that next month in November, we will launch a public consultation in Scotland on ecocide law, and I'm happy to update Jojo that as I sit here today, I've had confirmation from the Scottish Government that they are keen to meet with Stop Ecocide when you are in Scotland next month. So really positive. But it is quite scary to be the sort of first mover, certainly for us within the UK. So really, if everyone in the panel could give some advice to myself and colleagues from Scotland, because we want to engage as many people as possible and use accessible language and build broad support for ecocide law within Scotland. So what would the top tips be, and how do we harness not just grassroots and youth activists, but expert scientists and also the media as well, because a lot of this language around ecocide law will be untested and unfamiliar to media in Scotland and UK. So really just looking for advice rather than a question from me. Thank you.
Susanne,
Okay, so
and Vale.
if we talk about the discussion of ecocide in Iceland, which started when I invited Polly Higgins to come here, and we had an open discussion in the Nordic House, which is like a cultural Nordic house we have in the university area, where I spoke, asked her a question, and she answered, and the hall was full. It was full of people, and not the usual suspects I see at my environmental gatherings, and I was really surprised. So, and people were really interested, and they afterwards wanted more. How could they help? And one of them made a Facebook group called Mother Earth Calls, and where we have sort of put the information along the way on ecocide. So that's how the conversation started, and I actually had to make up an Icelandic word for it. I just translated ecocide, which actually, if you translate it back, sounds like eco-murder. And people said, no, that's too strong, that's too strong. And I said, well, propose something else. How would you say it? And nobody came up with a better term. Now this word is in the public sphere. It's on the news, and it's in the newspapers. Everybody knows what it means. So I think, and then when Andres Ingi, wrote this proposal for a law in Iceland, he held a public meeting, which was also well attended, and we got a lawyer from the UK also to speak, Roger. Richard Rogers. Yeah, Richard Rogers, and the leader of the environmental protection NGO in Iceland was there also, said, this is a no-brainer, of course we should be supporting this, and so on. So just go for it, I think.
You were going to add something, was that?
Yeah, well, it's different tricks for different groups. What we found was that the environmental NGOs were there already. So once the proposal was out, they were with us all the way. For the politicians, on the other hand, just between us, I'll share with you a dirty trick that we used. It's right what Jojo said, that no politician wants to be the first one to a party, but no politician wants to look like they're stuck in the past either. So a soft level of bullying, showing people that, this is inevitable. If they want to be seen as dinosaurs, fine, but if they want to be seen as progressive and nice, then join your forces. But yeah, just keep that between us.
We are, so I think it's only right that we give the last word to you.
Oh, thank you. So just briefly, I think the other thing as well that this initiative brings is a level of hope. I think the corporate PR machine's done a fantastic job of making everybody individually feel guilty for climate and ecological breakdown. But of course, your average person, if they walk into a supermarket and everything's covered in plastic, they didn't choose that. If they have to drive a fossil fuel car because they can't afford anything else, they didn't choose that. These decisions are made at the height, at the top of government and industry. And Ecocide law has, because it goes to those people at the highest point of responsibility, it has a way of accessing that. So that ourselves as citizens, not just consumers, but as citizens, we get better options and healthier options. So I think that's another really important aspect. And thank you all so much.
Absolutely. Thank you. And thank you to our panel.